On a winter night, beneath the dim lights of Constantinople, a young woman lies in the streets, forgotten by the world, cloaked in dust and silence. Her life, marked by tragedy and loss, is about to collide with that of a powerful man caught between duty and the ghosts of his past. A single encounter will forever change their fates. What secret does she hide in her gaze? Can love bloom where society sees only scandal? Get ready for a romance that defies time, intrigue, and prejudice. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And do you believe true love can overcome every obstacle in a period romance? Constantinople, winter of 1872. The city stirred under a veil of mist, with the muffled roar of the Bosphorus in the distance and the first calls to prayer echoing over snow-covered rooftops. The grand bazaar, ancient and colossal, like a heart of stone and echoes, was slowly awakening beneath frost-laced awnings. Merchants in tattered cloaks hurriedly opened their stalls amid steam, spices, and soot, while stray cats slipped between cobblestones like silent shadows. There, among worn columns and crooked doors, lay the small frame of a young woman wrapped in rags. She slept curled against the wall, her bare feet tucked beneath filthy skirts and a tattered shawl draped over her shoulders. Zara. Strands of dark brown hair peeked from beneath a damp scarf, and her face, though pale from the cold, held a strange serenity, as if beauty refused to abandon the dignity of her soul. No one looked at her. No one remembered her. Except for an orphan boy who once shared a piece of bread with her, the world seemed to have condemned her to oblivion. Zara was the daughter of a tapestry merchant, a gentle-voiced man who taught her to read before she could walk with confidence, who used to recite Rumi and the old Yunus Emre between rolls of silk and cups of cardamom coffee. But her world burned in a single night. A fire fanned by the Galata wind devoured her home, her mother, and finally her father's voice. His voice that died mid-verse as the beams collapsed around him. Since that night, Zara had asked for nothing but silence. That winter was harsher than most. Beggars died wrapped in newspapers, mothers shielded their children from the wind, and dogs searched for warmth among dying embers. Zara, with no refuge but her own stubbornness, wandered the alleys of Eminönü, gathering scraps of stale bread, and wrapping herself in rags found behind kitchens. That morning the sky hung heavy with a gray that promised no mercy. She walked aimlessly, lips cracked, hands numb. The market was bustling, but not for her. A rough shove sent her to the ground. No one stopped. Her body trembled. She crawled toward a nearby staircase, near the dry fountain of a ruined mosque, and collapsed. She rested her head on a marble step and whispered something. It wasn't a cry or a plea, but a fragment of poetry, one her father used to recite on the coldest nights. What you are seeking is also seeking you. And then the world faded. A dark carriage stopped at the edge of the street. Two horses pawed at the snow, snorting. From it stepped a tall man, cloaked in a black wool coat. A deep red fez tilted slightly over his temple. His presence was commanding, yet his face bore the haunted distance of a man who had long avoided looking back. Emir Daryan Pasha, member of the Sultan's council, widowed for 5 winters, looked down at the young woman lying motionless. He was about to turn away, about to leave her. Then he heard those words. He stopped. Zara's eyes, half open and rimmed with frost, lifted slightly toward him, and in that fleeting moment, there was something in her gaze beyond despair, a faint flickering flame that struck him as uncannily familiar. For a second, he saw his late wife, Aylin, as she had been in those final days, pale, resigned, beautiful even in the silence of suffering. Zara was not Aylin, but in her expression lingered the same defeated sweetness, the same wounded dignity that hit him like a distant echo. "Who is she?" asked the coachman. Darian didn't answer. He slowly knelt, unbothered by the mud or the stares of passers-by. He wrapped the girl's body in his cloak and lifted her into his arms. She was light as a bundle of feathers, and yet he knew the weight of that moment would upend his world. "Take us to the house in Üsküdar," he ordered firmly. "No one must know she was here." Though startled, the coachman obeyed. Zara did not open her eyes again. The carriage vanished into the fog blanketing the Galata Bridge, and the pigeons of the market took flight as if something sacred had just been torn from the stones. No one understood why Emir Darian Pasha, one of the most respected men in the empire, chose to take a beggar into his private home. Not even he did. Dawn reached the palace like an ambiguous promise, wrapped in the call of the muezzins and the scent of freshly baked bread wafting through the high lattice work. The harem awakened slowly, like a beast with 1,000 faces, some delicate, others cunning, many resigned. For Esma, each day was a chance to go unnoticed, to blend into the shadows that drifted silently through the corridors. She had learned to move with soft steps, eyes lowered, hands always busy with tasks too small to attract suspicion. The world around her seemed made of velvet and marble, but beneath every surface gleamed the hidden edge of rivalry. Life in the harem was no golden dream as the popular tales suggested. It was a constant dance between beauty and survival. Some women lived for a glance from the chief eunuch, others spied from behind silver-threaded curtains, and many, too many, remained silent, hoping only to grow old without ever being summoned. Each one was after something: power, love, freedom, or simply not to be forgotten. Esma watched everything in silence. From her assigned corner, she quickly learned who was pretending, who was scheming, who cried themselves to sleep. She spoke to no one, but her eyes registered every movement, every brush of fabric, every phrase cloaked in humility, but heavy with ambition. It was in those early days that she noticed the older woman with the round face and sharp eyes who looked at her too often, not with cruelty, but with a mix of suspicion and compassion. One afternoon, while the other girls wove colorful ribbons under the strict gaze of a Kalfa, Esma was singled out with a simple gesture. The Kalfa's name was Hatice, and she wore her hair covered by a deep blue scarf, its edges trimmed with a worn golden border. Her ink-black eyes settled on Esma without blinking. "You don't speak," she murmured, not accusingly. Esma lowered her head. She didn't pretend to be mute, but neither did she deny it. Silence was her most effective shield. Hatice studied her for a moment longer, then stepped closer and adjusted her veil with surprising gentleness. Her fingers were rough, calloused by years of service, but her gesture was almost maternal. "I don't know who you are, girl," she whispered near her ear, "but you're not like the others, and that might save you or destroy you." She said nothing more, but from that day forward, Esma was often assigned to tasks near Hatice, cleaning carpets, tending oil lamps, organizing the shelves where perfumes were stored. None of it was noble work, but it kept her away from the most dangerous eyes. As she went about those duties, Esma discovered that the harem spoke without words. There were codes, glances, calculated silences. The girls grouped themselves by region of origin or by the influence they held over certain eunuchs. The more experienced ones taught the newcomers how to walk gracefully, to bow with a straight spine, to smile without showing teeth. But they also trained them in the art of power, how to hide objects, slip ointments into rivals' combs, manipulate without leaving a trace. One night, as she returned from a minor errand in the reading room, Esma crossed through the inner courtyard. It was an enclosed garden flanked by marble columns and hanging lanterns that cast a warm, flickering light. The others were occupied with the tea ceremony, and the night breeze carried a strange wave of nostalgia. For a moment she felt far from the palace, far from that world of heavy robes and poisoned perfumes. She closed her eyes, and then she sang. It was barely a murmur, a childhood melody her mother used to hum while spinning wool on cold northern afternoons. A simple tune, almost without words, that spoke of falling leaves and birds that migrate without knowing if they'll return. She sang in a low, broken voice, as if the note itself were a sigh trapped in her throat. When she finished, silence wrapped around her completely. She didn't know someone had been watching from the upper gallery. A faint creak made her turn, but she saw no one. Embarrassed for letting emotion carry her away, she pressed her lips together and hurried back to her cell. She didn't sing again. The next morning, she found a small, clean handkerchief folded neatly on her mat. It was made of fine linen, white, unadorned. It wasn't hers. It had no scent, no mark, no embroidery, but its presence unsettled her. She quickly hid it among the folds of her cloak that same morning while helping Hatis arrange bottles of essence. She dared to meet the woman's eyes for the first time. Hatis held her gaze, and after a few moments of silence, she spoke in a low voice as if reciting a verse meant for someone else. Sometimes the garden seems empty, but there are those who can hear even the stones sing. Esma said nothing. She didn't know if the words were a warning, a comfort, or something else. The days went on, each like the one before, but now the air felt different. She sensed she was being watched, not in a threatening way, but with a quiet curiosity. One night she heard footsteps stop outside her cell, then move away without the door opening. Another time, a vase was replaced with a more beautiful one, and no one noticed. Small gestures, subtle but undeniable. Though she didn't realize it yet, she was no longer invisible. In the kitchens, some women began to refer to her without using her name. The mute, they said. The one who doesn't smile. The girl with the soot. Each projected a different story onto her. Daughter of a general, a Circassian witch, a rebellious slave. None were true, but the fact that they talked about her meant danger was growing. Because in the harem, being a mystery was more provocative than being beautiful. One afternoon, while walking through the corridor of lamps, she heard the laugh of Nergis, the favorite, for the first time. It was a melodic sound, clear like a crystal bell, but with an imperceptible edge. Esma hadn't seen her yet, but just hearing her was enough to understand that the sound was as dangerous as a blade without a hilt. She lowered her gaze and quickened her steps. That night, as she lay down, she thought of her mother again. Her pale face, the strong hands that braided her hair with tenderness, the words she used to say every time she combed it. Beauty fades, my child, but what cannot be seen, that is what lasts. And so, wrapped in that old phrase like an invisible shield, Esma closed her eyes, unaware that her silence had already begun to open doors many would have paid dearly to pass through. The harem slept, but the whispers stayed awake, like fate, like the eyes that had seen her sing, like an echo, one no one hears, yet is already beginning to change everything. The fog over Constantinople lingered like a cold caress, dense, gray, and ever-present. The cypress trees in the gardens of Üsküdar bent under the weight of dew, and the fountains in the main courtyard remained still as if the entire city were holding its breath, waiting for a secret on the verge of being revealed. In the home of Emir Darian Pasha, the whisper of the wind barely slipped through the cracks of the tall windows, and the servants walked on tiptoe, affected by the Iafa, solemn air that had settled over the house since the arrival of the young guest. Zara no longer trembled. Her body, though still fragile, was beginning to regain strength, and her eyes, once clouded by hardship, now held a quiet glow, as if the soul inside her had decided not to surrender. She slept in a spacious room with linen curtains and an ochre-toned tapestry hanging beside the bed. Every morning she opened her eyes with the uncertainty of someone unsure whether they were dreaming. Fatma, silent and diligent, brought her breakfast at the same hour each day: cinnamon tea, fig bread, and a piece of fresh cheese. She never asked questions, but in her quiet presence, Zara found a comforting kind of company. It was as if the silence they shared, one by choice, the other by circumstance, wove a wordless bond between them. Durayan, for his part, kept his distance. He came down to the dining room at night, when he believed Zara was already asleep, and spent long hours in his study reading council reports or writing letters without recipients. Sometimes his footsteps echoed from the upper floor, and she followed them with her eyes, as if the rhythm of his boots might reveal something about the man hiding behind such composed restraint. But beyond that house the world did not sleep. In the halls of Topkapi Palace, rumors spread like flies in a market. The women of the harem whispered mockingly that Emir Darian Pasha, that famously reserved nobleman, had picked up a beggar from the streets of the Grand Bazaar, that he kept her hidden in his house in Üsküdar, far from the eyes of the court, that perhaps she was his mistress or a spy in disguise. No one knew for certain who she was, but the scandal grew. Among those who delighted most in the gossip was Sultana Nuriye, the Sultan's cousin, a powerful figure in the harem and a feared presence at diplomatic receptions. With a sharp face and a feline smile, Nuriye had harbored a quiet resentment for more than a decade, ever since Darian's father thwarted her attempt to become the late Sultan's first wife. Years later, seeing the son of her old enemy entangled with a nameless stranger, she felt as though fate had delivered her an unexpected offering. "Any stain," she said one afternoon, examining a sapphire brooch in the mirror, "can become ink if you know how to write with poison, and this girl, she's the perfect stain." Meanwhile, in the house in Üsküdar, Darian watched Zara from afar. There was something about her that unsettled him, but not in a physical sense. It wasn't desire that kept him alert, but a different kind of vulnerability. One that didn't come from her body, but from her soul. Zara asked for nothing. She never complained. She spoke only when necessary. But her gestures, her silences, and the way she gazed out the window, as if waiting for the world to return what it had taken, disarmed him. One afternoon, while reviewing old blueprints in his study, he gently knocked on the door to her room. "I come in?" Zara, who had been embroidering by the window, stood up, her heart in her throat. She had heard him walking, speaking to the servants, murmuring in the halls, but this was the first time he stood so close. "Yes," she replied in a faint voice. Durayan entered with steady steps. He wore a short travel cloak of dark blue wool and held suede gloves in one hand. He looked at her seriously, without preamble. "We're going out." Zara blinked, incredulous. "Out?" "Yes. You can't go on living here like a shadow. If the world is going to talk, it should at least have a clear picture of who you are." She frowned. "I'm no one." "That's not true." She lowered her gaze. "I have no name, no home, no dowry. So what am I?" "A woman with more dignity than many of the ladies I've known," he answered without hesitation. "And dignity deserves to be dressed, not hidden." He took her by carriage to the Beyoğlu district, where seamstresses, serving the palace ladies, kept discreet and elegant workshops. Zara said nothing. The rhythm of the wheels and the clatter of hooves on wet stone were the only dialogue between them. Upon arrival, a woman with a stern face and delicate hands greeted them. "She's the one," Darian said, offering no further explanation. "I need 3 outfits, one for the street, one for indoors, and one for formal occasions." Zara didn't protest. She entered the fitting room in silence, but when the silk fabric brushed her skin, she stepped back. "I can't wear this," she whispered. "Why not?" "It's not mine, it's too clean." Darian stepped closer. He didn't touch her, only spoke, his voice low, almost like a shared secret. "Just because you've touched the dust doesn't mean you belong to it. It's not the silk that stains, it's the fear of being worthy of it." Zara closed her eyes. She felt the weight of his words as if they had been spoken not with his voice, but with his soul. When they returned, Fatma was waiting with a box in her hands. It was an old, dust-covered notebook she had found while cleaning the library. Zehra took it gently. On the first page, in faded ink, was a name, Murad. Murad? Zehra asked aloud, more to herself than to the other woman. Darian heard her from the entryway. He was my older brother, died 6 years ago. No one really understood him. He wrote constantly. He was obsessed with records, with words, with codes. He used to say everything important should be written down, even if no one ever reads it. Zehra ran her fingers across the worn cover. She didn't open it, not yet. Something deep inside her told her that words should never be forced, not even someone else's. That night, as the lights of Constantinople flickered beyond the Bosphorus, Zehra sat by the window and touched the edge of the box that held her. New dresses. They weren't hers, not yet. She didn't feel they belonged to her, but Darian's words echoed within her with a heat that burned in her chest. Because deep in her soul, though she didn't know it yet, the dust was starting to give way, and beneath that dust, something was waiting to shine. The towers of Topkapi Palace rose over the horizon like silent sentinels, bathed in the soft light of winter that barely filtered through the clouds. Its ancient, majestic walls still echoed with centuries of power, secrets, and betrayal. Stepping through its gates wasn't just entering an imperial compound, it was stepping into the heart of a world ruled by invisible laws and piercing gazes. Zehra understood that the moment she set foot inside, she wore one of the modest outfits sewn for her by the palace seamstress, a pearl-colored entari cinched with an ivory sash and a thin veil draped over her neatly tied back hair. The ensemble wasn't lavish, but it radiated cleanliness and grace, as if each fold had been smoothed by hands that respected the dignity of its wearer. Fatma, ever mute yet steady, led her through the corridors of the wing designated for domestic duties. Thanks to one of Darian's quiet maneuvers, Zehra had been entered as Fatma's temporary assistant in the medicinal herbs section. Zehra didn't fully understand her role in that place, but she sensed that once again she was being placed before something far larger than herself. The harem garden was a corner of caged beauty, rose bushes without bloom, pots of basil and rosemary, fountains stilled by the season. A few women sat chatting beneath the portico, draped in silks and velvets that stood in stark contrast to the grayness of the day. The air smelled of stale water, incense, and pride. Zehra lowered her gaze and kept walking, but not unnoticed. "Is that the beggar?" a sharp voice whispered. "They say Darian pulled her out of the mud. Perhaps he found in her what he never could in the daughters of nobility," added another, her smile laced with venom. Zehra didn't respond. She had learned that some stares should not be met with words, but with the poise of a straight spine. She continued her tasks among baskets of dried leaves and glass jars, cleaning, sorting, without letting go of a single inch of her dignity. She asked for no help. She sought no explanation, but the rumors slithered like snakes through the walls. And one of those snakes had a name, Sultana Nuriye. That evening, the powerful cousin of the Sultan hosted a private dinner in honor of the Yahu, Minister of Finance, a man beloved by the people and feared by tax collectors. Nuriye, a master of political games, was weaving her web of alliances carefully. What no one expected, and what she would never have allowed had she known earlier, was Darian's arrival with company. Zehra entered the salon on Darian's arm. No jewelry, no makeup. Just the silent presence of someone with nothing to prove. Her moss-green velvet dress was simple, but flawless. Her hair was tied in a low bun, adorned only with a mother-of-pearl comb. No introduction was needed. Her very presence brought the room to a standstill. Nuria stared at her as if seeing a ghost. Zehra bowed respectfully, but not too deeply. then took her seat at the table, slightly behind the others, as was proper for someone with no title. Darian, for his part, sat with the composure of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "House. Nay, curious Pasha," Nuria said, her smile sharp as a blade. "I didn't know you had found yourself a new protege, though it seems natural beauty has taught her manners, not bloodline." Some of the ladies' laughter chimed like cracked bells. Zara raised her gaze slowly. "Forgive me, Your Highness. I was trained more in poetry than protocol, but if I may, I will remember your name alongside those women who turn venom into incense and envy into perfume." Silence fell like a curtain. Nuria pressed her lips into a thin line. The minister raised an amused eyebrow. Darian said nothing, but his hand tightened slightly around the stem of his glass. Zara turned her eyes to the centerpiece, where a single white rose bloomed timidly among dried flowers. When the evening ended, Zara was escorted to an antechamber to wait for Darian. She wasn't sure whether she had made a mistake, but she didn't regret it. Behind the curtains, servants murmured. Some talked about her, others only whispered, and from a shadowed corridor a solitary figure watched her without being seen, the Sultan. He had left his quarters upon hearing that the young Pasha had brought a woman without a family name. It was unusual, it was forbidden, but the face of the girl he saw did not match the vulgarity of scandal. He studied her gestures, the way she adjusted her shawl, the quiet path of her eyes across the room, without arrogance. There was something there. He didn't yet know what, but he would remember it. As Zara and Darian returned home, the carriage rolled silently down the avenue lined with sycamores. They didn't speak until they were inside the vestibule, beneath the dim glow of the lamps. "I shouldn't have taken you," Darian finally said. "They're not ready for you." Zara met his gaze without fear. "And are you?" The silence thickened between them. There was an unspoken question, a touch not made, that neither the velvet of her dress nor the shadow of night could erase. I'm not, either," he admitted softly. Zara nodded. "Then don't protect me from them. Let me be the one to decide what I can face." Darian looked at her with a mix of astonishment and admiration. It was strange, almost disarming, that a woman who had once slept on stone now spoke with such authority. It wasn't arrogance. It was something purer, self-awareness, pride without pretense. That night, Nuria walked the palace courtyard with pursed lips. There was something about that girl that unsettled her more than her origins. It wasn't just her beauty, nor her poise. It was that cursed sense that she wouldn't break. And in a court like that, it was intolerable. "Find out everything," she ordered her maid. "Name, past, ashes, and dirt. If there's a crack, I'll find it." Back in Üsküdar, Zara undressed in silence. She placed the dress in her trunk and approached the worn notebook. She touched it with the tip of her finger, as if sensing that the most dangerous answers don't always come from the mouths of enemies, but from the pages that wait patiently to be opened. And while the city slept, the golden cage of the palace began to close, not with bars, but with words, glances, and slow poisons. But Zara was not a prisoner, not yet. Winter still clung to Constantinople. The nights remained long and damp, and the sun barely appeared, more a weary witness than a force strong enough to break the haze that cloaked the city. But in the house in Üsküdar, an unusual stillness filled every corner, as if the walls, the tapestries, and even the embers in the brazier knew that something on the verge of breaking was still holding its breath. Zara walked slowly through the inner garden. The damp ground crunched beneath. Her sandals and her gaze wandered along the edges of the pots, where rosemary leaves hung pale, half alive, half resigned. Since returning from the palace, the air between her and Darian had grown heavier, laden with long silences and glances that never quite met. But that morning, something shifted. Darian was waiting for her in the eastern room. where a large window opened onto the Bosphorus. He wore a dark blue velvet robe and held a small carved wooden box in one hand. His face, as always, seemed composed, but in his eyes stirred a shadow only a sensitive soul would notice. Zara entered unannounced. The soft creak of the door was enough for him to turn. "Did you send for me?" "No, I was waiting for you," he replied, setting the box on the low table. She remained standing, not moving closer. "Why?" Darian didn't answer right away. He stepped forward slowly, without his usual stiffness, as if each step weighed more than the last. When he was within a few feet of her, he stopped and met her gaze with an intensity that rippled across her. "Skin, because I don't want to keep hiding behind what's expected of me. Not behind duty, not behind the past." She felt a faint trembling in her core, but she didn't back away. Darian's expression wasn't that of a man speaking from power, but from the edge of his own humanity. "You don't know me," Zara said softly. "You don't know who I was or what I've done to survive. I know, and still, here I am." She closed her eyes for a moment. Her heart pulsed in her temples. "I'm not worthy of you," she added, almost in a whisper. "I'm not here to measure worth," he said. "I'm here because when I speak to you, the noise of the world disappears. Because when I look at you, I don't see the city or the laws or the titles. I see peace." Zara held her breath. He extended his arm and, without touching her, opened the box on the table. Inside lay a silver ring with a dark stone, simple but carefully polished. "What is this?" "A promise. Not an obligation. Not a debt. Just a choice. If you accept it, I'll know I'm not alone." She didn't touch the ring. She stepped back. "I can't. It wouldn't be right." "Right for whom?" Darian asked. "For those who see me as a tool? For those who believe a woman without a name cannot love or be loved?" Zara looked at him. Her throat tightened. She had dreamed of hearing words like these, but not from him. "Not in this world." "I owe you nothing, Zara," he said, stepping closer. "And you owe me nothing. Not gratitude, not obedience. But if any part of you believes this is real, then let me give you the only thing I have left. Truth." He took her hand, held it gently, not to claim it, not to control it. Then, slowly, he brought it to his lips and kissed it with such restraint that it was more powerful than any caress. Zara closed her eyes. The touch of his lips on her skin sent a shiver through her soul. It wasn't a gesture of desire. It was one of care, of faith, and that was infinitely more dangerous. When she opened her eyes, the answer was already inside her. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "But if you ever doubt me, promise you'll tell me. Don't protect me from the world if you're not ready to face your own, I promise." And in that moment, without trumpets or witnesses, something larger than a union began to form. But the city does not forgive those who defy its order. The next day, a sealed letter arrived at the residence. Darian was summoned by the Imperial Council. He was required to give account for personal decisions that compromised the integrity of his position and the image of the court. The news spread like fire on dry parchment. Noble households whispered of scandal. Maids murmured in corridors. The women of the harem savored the taste of looming humiliation. Zara said nothing. She didn't ask. She simply watched Darian dress for the meeting with his usual dignity, though his eyes were darker than before. "I'll return by nightfall," he said before stepping into the carriage. She nodded, though her soul felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Hours later, Fatma appeared with a handkerchief. She laid it gently on the table and unfolded it with care. Inside was a polished copper ring, plain, without stones. With soft gestures, she pointed to her own heart, then to Zara, and finally to the ring. "Whose was it?" Zara asked. Fatma looked up and shaped a word silently with her lips. "Mother." Zara picked it up with trembling hands. "Why are you giving it to me?" Fatma mimed an embrace. Then, with clumsy but patient signs, she formed a message. "So you'll remember you were chosen with love, not pity." Zara pressed the ring to her chest, and tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from the overwhelming weight of finally being seen. That same night, she began to pack the little she owned, not because she meant to run, but because something inside her told her she had to be ready. She took Murad's journal, the one she hadn't yet opened, and tucked it inside her shawl. As she leaned forward to close the box, the notebook slipped and fell to the floor. A page flipped open, revealing tightly written text filled with names, dates, and underlined phrases. Zara picked it up, held it carefully. She didn't read it, not yet, but deep within, she knew those pages weren't just the memories of a dead man. They were part of a truth she didn't yet understand. And that night, alone in the quiet shadows of the house, clinging to the copper ring and the journal of sleeping words, she understood that accepting love was not the hardest part. The hardest part was defending it when the world turned against it. The cold marble of the corridor echoed beneath Zara's footsteps like an early sentence. Each tile seemed to magnify the sound, as if the palace itself, ancient and proud, delighted in making her feel small. On either side, tall columns stood, like rootless trees, guarding the path of silence, while gold-threaded tapestries told stories of conquest, alliances, and betrayal. This was the heart of power, and she, a woman with no lineage, walked toward its center with her head held. High though her soul pulsed in her throat, Fatma walked beside her, her face tense, her eyes sharper than ever. There was no need for words between them. The language of loyalty was woven through glances and gestures. Both knew this wasn't just a simple inquiry. It was a hidden trial, cloaked in protocol, where the verdict seemed already written. The tall doors of the Hall of Honor opened slowly. Inside, a semicircle of influential women occupied precisely arranged seats, polished faces, piercing eyes, gloved hands, and fans moving in slow rhythm, like the wings of predatory birds. At the center, on a low platform, sat Nourieh, dressed in a garnet caftan and adorned with jewels that tinkled softly with each movement. Her smile was barely a curved line. Contained but sharp, Zara stopped in front of them, alone. Behind her, 2 guards closed the doors. The silence thickened, as if every breath was a violation. "Miss Zara," one of the ladies began, "you have been summoned by unanimous decision of the harem's inner council due to circumstances that compromise the moral integrity of the Uwe court and the image of Emir Daryan Pasha." Zara did not respond, not out of fear, but because she knew every word could be twisted against her if not measured with surgical precision. "We have been informed," another added, "that not only were you taken in without legitimate justification into a noble residence, but that you also maintain an improper relationship with the Pasha under the pretense of gratitude and service." Nourieh raised a sheet of paper. "And according to this statement signed by a soldier from the Bosphorus garrison, you were seen leaving his barracks at night on more than one occasion. Here is the testimony." The paper was placed theatrically on the central table. The other women feigned shock. One muttered something about disgrace. Another crossed herself discreetly. Zara pressed her lips together. Her pulse thundered in her temples, but she did not lower her head. "Do you have anything to declare?" asked the closest woman. Fatma stepped forward. She pulled a small slate from beneath her shawl and with a worn piece of chalk, clumsily, wrote, "It was me." The women leaned forward. Nourieh narrowed her eyes. Fatma wrote again, "I was with the soldier, not Zara." A wave of discomfort swept through the room. Eyes darted from one face to another. A sharp silence filled the space. Nourieh, keeping her composure, stood slowly. "A servant's chalkboard cannot overrule a signed military statement," she said coldly. Fatma looked at Zara. Her eyes were pleading, desperate. Zara shook her head gently. "It wasn't her," she said at last, her voice steady. "And it wasn't me either. The document is false, fabricated. I've never met the man who signed it." "So you're accusing the council of admitting forged evidence?" one lady asked sharply. Zara took a deep breath. "I'm saying I am not a threat to this place. only to those who cannot stand that a woman without a title dares to meet their gaze without flinching. A murmur rose. Nuria lifted her hand to silence the room just as the rear doors burst open. Darian entered. He wore the council's formal uniform, a short black cloak, and a silver medallion over his chest. His face was a mask of determination. He stood beside Zara, without permission, without a bow. The entire room held its breath. "This trial has no legitimacy," he said, his voice low and firm. "Because it doesn't seek the truth. It seeks to preserve a prejudice. It doesn't punish a crime. It punishes a threat to a social order built on hypocrisy." "You're violating protocol, Pasha," one of the ladies said. "This chamber did not summon you. And I do not recognize the authority of a chamber that attacks the dignity of an innocent woman." Zara looked at him, stunned, but Darian wasn't looking at her. He faced the crowd of women like a man who had nothing left to lose. "If keeping my position requires condemning her, then I resign. If staying in this court demands I reject her, then I choose exile." The word echoed like thunder. "You'll leave with her?" Nuria asked coolly. "Is that what you're saying?" "Yes, because she has asked me for nothing, and yet has given me everything back." Silence fell, absolute. Darian took Zara's hand, without hesitation, and led her out of the chamber. No one dared to stop them. From a high corridor, hidden behind a thick curtain, the Sultan watched in silence. He said nothing. He simply took a sip of tea and turned his eyes towards the window. Sometimes, scandal was the only way to pull truth out from the shadows. That same night, an official letter arrived at the house in Üsküdar. Darian had been stripped of his titles, relieved of his duties, and ordered to retire to one of his rural estates. There was no public trial, no formal sentence, just a firm command wrapped in the elegant language of disgrace. Zara packed in silence. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble. She simply packed what she needed, with the precision of someone who has learned to carry only what truly matters: dignity, faith, and love. Before closing her trunk, she picked up Murad's journal. She held it in her hands. It was no longer just a forgotten object. Now it felt like something that needed to be opened. She did so slowly. The first page bore an underlined phrase: "No man who keeps his soul intact is ever truly defeated." Zara turned a few more pages. Names, numbers, cross-references, snippets of poems, notes on council sessions, observations she didn't yet understand. But something inside her said these weren't just memories, they were pieces of a truth she hadn't yet uncovered. She placed the journal in her bag, took one last look at the house where she had stopped being invisible, then stepped into the carriage beside Darian. No words needed, and as the carriage pulled away down the cobbled roads, the sky over Constantinople darkened into a deep, solemn gray, as if honor had finally chosen a side. The Ottoman countryside moved to a different rhythm, one not measured by imperial drumbeats or courtly whispers, but by the slow steps of oxen, the distant call of the muezzin, and the creaking of branches at dawn. In the outskirts of Eyüp, where the city faded into soft hills and drowsy fields, the old estate inherited by Darian stood like a breath of relief. A modest residence of stone and fine wood, surrounded by olive trees, fig trees, and a small garden that had been left untended. For years it was a house without banners, no flags, no crests, just quiet walls and wide roofs that sheltered a new way of life. There were no whispering servants, no hallways heavy with protocol, only hands, honest words, and time. Zara adapted with the calm of someone who had known the storm. With a simple scarf covering her hair, she gathered ripe fruit, watered the garden, and prepared herbal infusions from the plants she tended with care. She no longer wore silk or velvet, just clean linen in soft colors like the landscape around her. Her hands, once delicate as broken lilies, were growing strong with the knowledge of the earth, and her face free of ornament or paint, was more beautiful than ever. Fatma arrived a few days later. No one had expected her, but she appeared one afternoon with a small suitcase and a determined look. Duryan greeted her with a quiet smile, and Zara embraced her in silence. There was room for her. There always would be. From that day on, they shared the work, silent laughter, and glances that spoke more than 100 letters. Duryan, quieter than ever, began to change. The weight he had carried for years, the name, the duty, the position, seemed to dissolve in the country air. He walked at dawn, wrote in his father's old library, and restored forgotten rooms with his own hands. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his voice was steadier, like a river that had learned to follow its course. One morning, as the sky turned golden between the olive branches, Zara found him in the gallery, preparing tea. "Can I help you?" she asked softly. He looked at her, and something in his gaze was different. Calm, yes, but also certain. "Yes," he said, handing her a small cup. "But not right now. Today, I just want you to listen." Zara sat across from him. She didn't need words to know something was about to change. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, "more than I usually allow myself. And I've come to a conclusion." He paused. "You saved me. Not when you followed me. Not when you accepted the ring. You saved me when you looked at me without expecting anything, and still chose to stay." Zara lowered her eyes, moved. "I want this place to be your home," he continued. "I want these walls, this silence, to be not a temporary refuge, but the start of something new. I want to marry you. Not because of what we've lost, but because of what we can build." Zara's heart seemed to stop for a moment, not from surprise, but from the depth of his words. She nodded slowly, and in her eyes bloomed a quiet, unadorned emotion. The ceremony was simple. A clear morning, birds singing in the trees, and an elderly village imam who blessed their union in a corner of the garden. There were no distinguished guests or embroidered robes. Zara wore the same dress she used to tend the plants, her hair tied back, a white flower tucked behind one ear. On her ring finger, the copper ring Fatma had given her, a symbol of love. Beyond titles, scandal, or gold, Fatma embroidered a small pillow with green thread to hold the ceremonial cups. And for the first time since her arrival, she truly smiled. In the days that followed, Zara noticed Fatma growing more expressive. She no longer wrote only in chalk. She began to embroider words, to draw feelings into soft fabrics she hung throughout. The house-like signs. One afternoon, as they wove together under the almond tree, Fatma took Zara's hand, and with trembling fingers traced onto her palm. "Thank you for not asking." Zara looked at her with tenderness. "I don't need to know," she said, "unless you want to tell me." Fatma nodded. Then, with slow and steady gestures, she told her story. Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, as if afraid to shatter by looking back. Her mother had been a lesser concubine in the harem, falsely accused of conspiring against a noble woman. She was executed without trial, without defense, without a voice. Fatma, only 8 years old at the time, saw her mother kneel beneath the shadow of the cypress trees in the central courtyard. From that day, her voice had left her. Not from illness, but from grief, the kind that settles in the body and refuses to leave. Zara embraced her in silence, and that silence said more than any lament ever could. But peace has silent enemies. 1. Afternoon, while Darian was reviewing old documents in the library, a letter arrived bearing the palace seal. He opened it calmly, but his eyes tightened as he read the first lines. "What is it?" Zara asked from the doorway. It took him a moment to answer. "My brother is dead." Zara stepped closer. Though she had never met Murad, she knew that name carried weight. "What does the letter say?" "That his will hasn't been validated, that there's dispute over the inheritance." Some council members claim I've forfeited my rights because of the exile." Zara felt a chill. "Nuriye?" Darian nodded. "She's convinced the Sultan that I can't manage the family estates without damaging the lineage. She claims our union has compromised my judgment." Zara didn't respond. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the table. Murad's journal was there, open halfway through. Several undated notes, scattered fragments. "Do you think he left something written?" she asked softly. "Murad wrote everything down. But I don't know if that'll matter in a court that's decided I no longer have a name." Night fell, with painful slowness. Lamps were lit one by one, and in the garden the crickets began their song. Zara stepped into the courtyard, a shawl around her shoulders. She looked out over the open land, where the world still seemed untouched. She knew happiness was a house without banners, but she also knew the soul's enemies wore disguises, sealed letters, empty titles, laws written to wound, and she understood that if the fight returned to her doorstep, this time she would not face it alone. This time she was a wife, and she was ready to defend what the world could never understand, a love born of dust, but stronger than any crown. The first warning wasn't a jolt or a spoken threat, it was silence. A different kind of silence, heavier than the fog that usually settled at dawn over the hills of Ayup. Zara felt it the moment she woke up, when the birdsong seemed distant and the warmth of the brazier barely touched the air. She went to the window, and though she couldn't say why, her chest tightened. Darian hadn't come down for breakfast. Fatma, uneasy, told her she had heard him coughing repeatedly the night before, though he'd insisted it was just dust from the old books. But Zara, who knew the sound of his breath in sleep, had already noticed in recent days a strange fatigue in his eyes, a deep weariness that neither rest nor fresh air could cure. She found him in his study, slumped over the desk, his face pale, his hands cold. "It's just a passing fever," he said, managing a weak smile. "Don't lie," she replied, placing her hand on his forehead. "You've had a fever for days, and you refuse to admit it." "I didn't want to worry you." Zara held back her tears. It wasn't fear she felt. It was helplessness, the kind that burns in your throat when love is threatened not by the world, but by the body that carries it. She helped him lie down, prepared a ginger and cinnamon bark infusion, and asked Fatma to send an urgent message to the village doctor. She couldn't afford to lose him. Not now. That was when the second warning arrived. A dark carriage pulled up in front of the house. From it stepped a young man, elegant in appearance, refined in manner, but with a hardened expression, as if his face had been sculpted by others' judgments. He introduced himself as Azar Bey, a distant cousin of Sultana Nuriye and special delegate from the Council of Succession. "I've come to inspect the legitimacy of this property," he said, skipping any greeting, "and to summon Mrs. Zara to appear before the local council." Zara looked at him without blinking. "On what grounds?" "A formal complaint has been filed. It is suspected that your marriage to the former Pasha was falsified to obtain rights to properties that are not legally yours." The words hit her like a blow to the gut, but she didn't lower her gaze. "Who signed the complaint?" "A lady whose name need not be revealed," he said coldly. "But it is no secret that Sultana Nuriye has expressed concern over the corruption of her family's bloodline." The insult was elegant, but brutal. Without raising her voice, Zara led him to the sitting room. Fatma, watching from the doorway, clenched her fists. Azar Bey scanned every corner of the house, as if searching for signs of greed or deception, but all he found were worn books, dried flowers, and hand-woven fabrics. A lived-in home. Nothing ostentatious. "I will face the council," Zara said firmly. "I don't need my husband's presence to prove I've told the truth. And if you're asked for formal documentation, I'll provide it. And if your union is declared invalid," Zara looked him in the eye, her voice like steel, "then they'll call me a widow before they call me a fraud." The next day, wearing her best plum-colored intari and a light veil draped gently over her shoulders, Zara walked through the doors of the small local council building. She brought no lawyers, no letters of recommendation, only her word. And the truth? The council members, 5 older men and 1 woman with meticulously pinned white hair, received her with polite detachment. Azar Bey was present, alongside 2 scribes. The room was solemn, heavy with judgment. "Mrs. Zira," the council president began, "you stand accused of falsifying marital documents to benefit from a disputed family inheritance. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" "Yes," she said, "everything I own in that house was earned with my heart, not with ink." "Do you have proof the marriage was legally carried out?" "I have no blood witnesses, but I have one of the soul." Fatma, waiting in the adjoining room, was called in. She stepped in with steady posture, carrying the small pillow she had embroidered for the ceremony. She handed it to the council. Still stitched into the fabric were the initials of Darian and Zara, joined by a golden thread crossing a heart. One of the councilmen frowned. "This proves nothing," Azar Bey said. "It's a symbolic object." Zara, who had remained silent, raised her voice. "Symbols are proof too. Love doesn't need notaries. But if you want paper, I have that as well." She reached into her bag and pulled out Murad's journal. She placed it on the table with care, as if it might break. Flipping through the pages with steady hands, she found a passage she had marked. "My brother Darian has been more just than I ever was. That is why I bequeath these lands to him, not for the blood that binds us, but for the moral debt I owe. May this act redeem the betrayal I never confessed." The council members leaned forward. They took notes. Azar Bey tried to dismiss it, arguing that a personal journal was not an official document. "Then check Murad's records," Zara said. "You'll find the same words echoed in the document he signed months before he died. The truth is in the lines of a man who lived with guilt and wrote it down in silence." The council asked for time to deliberate. Zara left with her head held high. The sky, gray since morning, had begun to break open. When she returned home, Darian was asleep. Fatma sat beside him, gently stroking his hand. Zara knelt beside him and kissed his forehead. "Don't leave," she whispered. "I'm almost done protecting what we began." And that night, beneath timid stars above the sleeping fields, Zara understood something clearly. The price of lineage was not paid in blood or inheritance. It was paid in courage, in truth, and in the unwavering love of someone who refuses to kneel even before an empire. Maulid had arrived in Constantinople with the solemnity of centuries. The streets, usually cloaked in winter's impenetrable gray, were lit that night with lanterns hanging like captive stars. From the domes of the mosques to the corners of the poorest neighborhoods, a warm light spilled over the stones, the faces, and the memories. It was the celebration of the Prophet's birth, and everywhere echoed prayers, songs, and verses about compassion, justice, and rebirth. Zara watched. From her doorstep, wrapped in a dark cloak that contrasted with the growing glow outside, the lantern's light didn't reach the anguish burning in her chest. Inside, in the main room, Darian slept, or something close to sleep. His skin was pale, fever dominated him in waves, and his breathing was more a whisper than a breath. Fatma, silent as always, had prepared a cloth soaked in herbs and gently laid it on his forehead. But her wide, worried eyes betrayed her fear. Zara leaned over him and took his hand. It was warm, but weak. Darian barely opened his eyes. "Don't look at me like that," he whispered, voice rough and broken. "I'm not dead yet." She forced a smile, but the moisture in her eyes gave her away. "You're not going to die," she replied firmly. "Not today." Darian gave a soft laugh that sounded more like a sigh. "If I die tonight," he paused to catch his breath, "I'll die knowing you were the greatest victory of my life." Zara stood still. Her hand trembled in his, but she didn't look away. That confession, brief, quiet, and profound, pierced her like an invisible lance. He touched her cheek gently, as if his fingers still had the strength to hold her together. Then he closed his eyes. Without a word, Zara stood up. She walked to the desk and picked up Murad's journal, the notebook that for so long had been a mystery, a burden, a fear, and was now her only weapon. She held it to her chest for a few seconds, as if drawing courage from its pages. Fatma looked at her and understood. "Take care of him. Don't let him fade," Zara said softly. Fatma nodded, eyes wet. She placed a hand on her heart and then pointed to Darien. Zara stepped into the night. The city pulsed with life. Maulid chants rose through the cobbled alleys like threads of incense. Caravans of children with paper lanterns wandered the squares, and in the still open bazaars, vendors offered dates, nuts, and spices with near-sacred enthusiasm. But she saw none of it. She walked with the resolve of someone who had passed through fear's final threshold. Reaching the palace wasn't easy. The guards tried to stop her, but the seal etched into the inside cover of the journal was enough for a senior eunuch to bow slightly and disappear toward the upper chambers. "Wait here," he said, vanishing behind the tapestries. Zara stood in the corridor in front of a white marble column. Her heart pounded, but her face was like stone. She wasn't thinking of herself or of scandal or of the whispers behind every curtain. She thought of Darian's ragged breathing, of the voice that had called her a victory, as if it were both a confession and a goodbye. Time seemed to stop until the eunuch returned. He gave a small nod. "Follow me." Zara crossed silent halls and carpeted corridors until she reached a tall chamber, its ceilings gilded and walls lined with green tapestries. There, under the glow of an oil lamp, the Sultan awaited her. He was alone, seated on a dark velvet divan, a book in hand. His face, severe and weary, showed no surprise. "I've heard about you," he said without looking up. "Your boldness, your character, and also your silence." Zara did not lower her eyes. She stepped forward and offered the journal. "I didn't come to defend myself. I came to deliver the truth, not mine, but from someone who, even in death, was more noble than many still living." The Sultan took the journal, opened it, began to read in a low voice. As his eyes moved over the lines, his brows drew together. He turned the pages slowly. Then he paused at the one Zara had marked with a ribbon. He reread the passage 3 times, closed the journal, and held it in both hands. "Why didn't you come sooner?" "Because I didn't believe I'd be heard. I thought loving quietly was enough. I was wrong." The Sultan stood. He walked to a window overlooking the inner garden, where hundreds of lanterns floated like runaway stars. "The council will meet at dawn," he said. "I will read this myself before them." Then he turned. "You may go, and try to rest tonight, if you can." Zara gave a small bow and left. The walk back was slower. The lanterns were beginning to go out. The songs were fading. The city, exhausted by its own grandeur, was folding into itself. When she entered the house, Fatma rushed to meet her. "Well?" Fatma raised her fingers and mimed sleep. Zara entered the room. Darien was still lying there, but his face looked calmer, less tense. Zara sat beside him, took his hand. I took it to him. He read it. "Tomorrow, everything will change." As if her words were magic, Darien opened his eyes. He blinked, confused. "Where?" "At home," she whispered. "Where you're safe." He tried to sit up, but his body still didn't respond. "You went?" "Yes." "And now the truth has a voice." Darien smiled, just barely, but he smiled. He closed his eyes again, and for the first time in days, his breathing was deep and peaceful. The next morning, a messenger arrived on horseback. He carried a letter with the royal seal. Fatma took it, trembling, and handed it to Zara. She broke the wax with steady fingers. The council had ruled. The marriage was declared legitimate, the inheritance fully awarded, the lands restored, the accusations dismissed. Nuriye was stripped of all influence in succession affairs. Azar Bey, the cousin who had tried to discredit her, was exiled to a distant province. Zara lowered the letter. She said nothing. She only looked at Darian, who stood in the doorway, still weak, but upright. "You see," he whispered, "you weren't wrong to stay." She walked to him. Didn't embrace him, just took his hand. And in that simple touch, laden with everything they had lived, the past seemed to surrender to all that remained to be built. That night, as Constantinople returned to its noise, its rumors, its shadows, a small house in Eyüp was filled with silence, the kind of silence that doesn't weigh you down, the kind you earn when the world finally stops pointing fingers. And as the last Maulid lanterns flickered out over the city, no one noticed that among history's invisible names, one now shone, needing no crown. Zara, not chosen by blood but chosen by love. Winter had given way to a gentle spring, the kind that doesn't announce its arrival with fanfare, but with details. A flower blooming through cracks in the stone, the faint perfume of new leaves, the song of blackbirds among the olive trees. Surrounding the house, with no banners, the fields of Eyüp were dressed in pale green, and the air drifting in through the open windows carried the peaceful murmur of a different kind of life. Every morning, Zara came down early, a basket on, her arm and her hair covered with a light linen scarf. She walked to the old abandoned schoolhouse at the base of the hill, once a ruin with shattered windows and walls that whispered of forgetfulness. Now, after the silent work of many hands, the ruins had become a place where new voices began to grow. The neighborhood girls, wrapped in simple but clean tunics, ran to meet her each morning. Zara taught them to read, to write their names, to discover in written words a path to freedom. It wasn't an official school, nor one supported by decree, but with every mark a child made on the slate, there was the strength of something that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. "Today," Zara would say, drawing in the air the invisible outline of the sun behind a cloud, "we'll write about what can't be seen." And the girls would laugh, scribbling things like hope, the smell of fresh bread, and long hugs. A few meters away, under the shade of an old fig tree, Darian oversaw the rebuilding of what would soon be a small reading room. His steps were still slow, and the illness had left him permanently thin, but his gaze held light. The kind of light that only shines after the soul has been stripped of all that is unnecessary. He wore work clothes, no insignias or embroidery. He dirtied his hands, dragged beams measured with patience. There was something deeply redemptive in watching him bent over a plank, speaking with the builders as if he had never belonged to a royal court. In the afternoons, the garden behind the house turned into a secret haven where Fatma gathered a small group of deaf girls. She taught with her hands, her eyes, and her heart. She used gestures not found in any manual, but they carried sweetness, strength, and comfort. And when one of the girls managed, for the first time, to mimic her way of singing with signs, Fatma let out a silent laugh that lit up the entire courtyard. Zara watched them from the window in silence. "That little girl is learning to sing with her fingers," she said to Darian one afternoon. He smiled, still sanding the wood. "And you?" "Me. I'm learning to stay." The sun set slowly, gilding the edges of the sky. The stones of the path reflected the warmth of a day that had been good. One of those quiet days you don't announce, but you treasure. One April morning, a messenger arrived on horseback. He brought a letter sealed with the Sultan's crest. Zara opened it with steady hands. Darian read it beside her. The letter was formal, almost affectionate. They were invited to return to court, to take a seat of honor and join a new reform council the Sultan hoped to create, part of a promise for a renewed Constantinople. The letter was placed on the table. No one spoke for a long time. "It's a noble gesture," Zara said at last. "It is," Darian agreed. "But is it our place?" He shook his head. "It was. It no longer is." That night, as the breeze played with the curtains and the house filled with peace, Zara wrote the response. She thanked the invitation, offered her support from afar, and closed the letter with a line that was both gratitude and farewell. Sometimes true loyalty is choosing to remain where the soul can breathe. Weeks passed. The school was completed. The neighborhood girls decorated the walls with drawings of trees, letters, and stars. Zara embroidered a white flag with blue lilies and hung it by the entrance, a symbol of a new era that needed no imperial seal. One evening, as the sun brushed the rooftops with slow gold, Zara decided to walk alone. She followed the same path she had taken that winter when everything began. Her feet touched the stones that had once wounded her. She passed the candy stand of the blind, old man who still hummed his prayers. She crossed the market where women still haggled over dried figs and cinnamon. No one recognized her, and that was the most beautiful part, to be invisible again, but by choice. She arrived at the alley, where she once slept curled up in rags, trembling, lost. The same corner where the freezing wind had broken her, and where a voice from a man in a carriage changed her fate. She stopped. She wore a deep blue cloak embroidered with white lilies. Her hair was pulled into a low bun with dark strands, escaping that the wind gently teased. There was no sadness on her face, no pride either, only a quiet calm, the kind that comes after fear has been replaced by the courage to start over. She looked up at the sky. The moon, round and luminous, seemed the same as that distant night. But Zara was no longer the same. "Sometimes," she whispered, "life drags you through the dust, just so you can shine brighter." A girl ran past her, smiling, a notebook in her hand. When she saw Zara, she stopped. "Miss Zara, will you come tomorrow?" Zara looked at her tenderly. "Of course," she replied. "I always return where there are girls who want to learn." The child skipped away, and Zara turned, her gaze back to the sky. Constantinople, that cruel and magnificent city, had not defeated her. It had tested her. It had shaped her. It had sculpted her through injustice, love, loss, and rebirth. And now, among its stones and legends, it held the story of a woman who had been a beggar, a guest, a wife, the accused, and finally, free, not. A princess by decree, nor by blood, nor by gold, but by choosing to love without surrender, to be the flame that won't go out even when the wind blows. A woman who was a diamond long before she was ever called a princess. Time, always relentless, had kept moving forward without asking permission. 10 years had passed since that night of glowing lanterns, since Constantinople, in its eternal contradiction between grandeur and cruelty, allowed a woman with a forgotten name to write her own story. On the hill of Eyüp, the old house with no banners was still standing. Vines had partially covered the walls, and wild rose bushes bloomed untamed along the fence. The garden had grown, the well had been restored, and the small reading room had become a real school where every morning the soft murmur of dozens of girls filled the air like a new kind of song. Zara walked through the school's hallways with the same calm she once carried among ruins. Her face, more serene now, bore lines etched by sun and deep decisions, but her eyes still burned with that same flame of dignity. She no longer wore a blue mantle. Now she dressed in white, embroidered with pale gold thread. She stitched herself during the long winter nights. By her side walked an 8-year-old girl with her father's dark curls and her mother's untamable gaze. Her name was Lala, like the wild tulips growing along the Bosphorus. She loved reading Rumi's poetry aloud and asking why the sky changed color at sunset. Darien, thinner now, and with hair streaked in gray, still restored wood and taught the younger boys to build with their hands what power would never grant them by name. He was no longer called Pasha, nor did he wish to be. To the neighborhood children, he was simply Uncle Darien, the one who taught them how to use a plumb line, how to fairly divide a handful of nails, and how to respect someone else's. Work the same way you respect a promise made. Fatma, for her part, had found her own way to raise her voice. She never regained her speech, but she founded the first deaf girls' circle in Eyüp. They embroidered, they danced, they sang with their hands. Some came from the farthest districts just to see their silent choreographies, full of meaning. In her eyes there was pride. In her hands the strength of someone who built a bridge where once there was only a void. Nuraya, on the other hand, had paid the price of her ambition. Exiled to an estate in the countryside, she was forgotten by the court and by her own people. She died 5 winters ago without ceremony and without a gravestone. Some say she wrote letters with no recipients in her final days. Others say she never spoke Darien's name again. The power she once longed for never protected her from herself. Azar Bey never returned from exile. It's said he founded a military school in the provinces, but his figure faded into the archive records like so many who lived to inspire fear and died without a trace. Zahra's name, by contrast, began to be spoken by humble lips, not because of what she had gained, but because of what she had given. It was heard in markets, when a girl corrected her mother's spelling, in courtyards, when a young woman read a letter out loud, at night when women embroidered while reciting words not found in official books, but deeply remembered. Sometimes life drags you through the dust, just so you can shine brighter. The Sultan had grown old, and though his court had changed, no one dared erase the records of the woman who defied rumors with a truth written in the diary of a dead man. One spring afternoon, Zahra went alone to the alley where she had once slept. She walked slowly, holding Lala's hand. They stopped before a wall now covered almost entirely by vines. Zahra touched the stone with her fingertips, as if greeting a gentle ghost. "Did you sleep here, Mama?" Lala asked. "Yes," Zahra replied with a soft smile. "This is where everything began." The girl moved closer. "Were you afraid?" Zahra looked up at the sky. "I was cold, I was hungry, but afraid. Only until I saw him." Lala nodded, as if she understood everything, and maybe she did. They walked back under a full moon that bathed Constantinople in a soft glow, as if trying to soothe the scars of the past. A warm breeze carried the scent of baked bread, blooming jasmine, and what was yet to come. Zahra turned her face to the horizon, and she understood that true love is not measured by how passionately it begins, but by how steadfastly it endures through time, through silence, through change. And though her story was never written in history books, it was carved into the stones and the names the girls learned to spell, and in every heart that, like hers, was once dragged through the dust before learning how to shine. When Zahra's story began, she had nothing but a name, a past reduced to ashes, and a whisper of verses on her lips. But what many called misery was, in truth, the beginning of a profound transformation. Sometimes, life takes us to the very bottom to remind us that even in the darkest night, some souls were born to shine. This isn't just the story of a love that defied power, nor of a woman who overcame injustice. It is also a quiet lesson for anyone who has ever been judged, underestimated, or silenced. Zahra taught us that dignity cannot be bought, that truth doesn't always shout, and that true victory isn't found in palaces, but in the hearts of those who dare to love without giving up their essence. If you've made it this far, I invite you to write the word diamond in the comments. That way we'll know you too. Value the stories that rise from the dust but leave their mark. Like gold on stone, tell me, which part of this story touched your soul? What lesson are you taking with you? And if this tale moved you, don't miss the other stories linked at the end. They're full of emotion, hope, and twists that will keep your heart holding its breath. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Your presence here is now part of this story, and remember, never underestimate someone walking with wounded feet, because they might just be learning to fly.